everyone and welcome back. Think about the last book you've read. What were the 3 things it taught you? Can't remember? That's totally understandable and totally normal. It's very common to forget what we read. And in this video, I'll be talking about just that. Why do we forget what we read and what to do about that? If you're interested, please keep on watching. I was reading about how to better remember what we read, and this video is going to be very meta. I'm going to be using it to remember things that I read myself. So let's figure out why do we forget so much of what we read and what to do to remember at least something. Let's start with how we read. It's a bit boring, so let me go through that really quickly. You have probably heard about saccades. A saccade is a rapid, conjugate eye movement that shifts the center of gaze from one part of the visual field to another. When we read, this is the way we move our eyes between the words. And that's all I will tell you about the saccades because it's not a point of the video. If I read fiction or a book that I really enjoy, I read it slowly, and I'm not ashamed of that. If I need to find a piece of specific information very quick, I skim. That means I search for some keywords in the text. What happens very often is that we actually go back and forth between the words and sentences in order to understand them better. And that slows us down. You have probably heard from some gurus of speed reading that this is exactly what you shouldn't do. You should never go back and reread anything. And apparently it doesn't affect the comprehension. This video has nothing to do with speed reading, and let me tell you, speed reading also has nothing to do with remembering more. So I'm not going to advocate for or against speed reading. The only point I see in speed reading is that because we still forget so much, maybe it makes sense to save some time on reading things. However, I personally don't enjoy speed reading and could never ever force myself to doing that. So, let me ask you, what do you usually do in order to remember things that you read? I guess you highlight certain sentences or phrases and maybe make some notes, right? I do that too. Unfortunately, it doesn't help us remember things. It tricks us into thinking that we are doing something to remember, but in fact, it's not that helpful. All right, let's figure out why do we actually forget? In a nutshell, this is how the brain works. If we don't use the information often enough, the brain just doesn't want to spend any energy on that. But how often is often enough? There is this thing called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. And this is how it looks like. It hypothesizes the decline of memory retention in time. This curve shows how information is lost over time when there is no attempt to retain it. As you can see here, after just one day, we remember only 33% of the information we have consumed. But the good news is, it doesn't get that much worse after that. This visualization was created by a German psychologist, Hermann Ebbinghaus, who wanted to understand why do we forget things. There is some criticism on how Ebbinghaus got the results. Apparently, he only used himself as a sample size, and he tried to remember some nonsense 3-letter words. So what's important is that if we pay attention to those retention intervals, we can space our learning so that we can remember more. Let's dive into the meat of this video. What can we do to actually remember more? And before we dive in, please subscribe. Number 1, spaced repetition. Spaced repetition is one of the key techniques to remember things. According to the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, it's ideal to review what you have learned after 20 minutes, 60 minutes, 9 hours, say before you go to bed or first time you woke up, sometime during the next day, in 2 days, in 6 days, and in 31 days. If you think this is way too many intervals, which I think, you can reduce them to your liking. But please keep in mind that, according to the curve, we forget the most of the information during the first day, so it's crucial to review what you've learned a couple of times during the first day. Number 2, make notes with a twist. Okay, making notes is not very useless, but the important thing is that you make notes in the form of questions. Like that, it forces you to process the information and later recall it rather than recognize. You don't have to go overboard. One question per chapter is probably enough. This is the method suggested by Scott Young. For the paper books, he proposes to use index cards for the questions, and for the ebooks, to make highlights and to quiz yourself afterwards. Number 3, 3-2-1 method. I learned about this method from another YouTube blogger, Anastasia K. So she suggests from every piece of information or video or lecture that you consume, you take 3 things to remember, 2 things to research further or tell someone, and 1 thing to try. 3 things to remember, 2 things to research or tell someone, and 1 thing to try. Number 4, use the Feynman technique. Richard Feynman, the world-renowned physicist, used the following technique for learning. 1, choose a concept. 2, teach it to a toddler. 3, identify gaps and go to the source material. And 4, review and simplify. Teaching it to a toddler, or to anyone for that matter, will identify how well do you yourself understand the material. And the better your understanding, the easier it is for you to recall it later. You don't have to approach this method in a very formal way and go through all 4 steps. Just sharing what you have learned or read with a friend would already help you. And method number 5, ask 3 questions. Memory expert Jim Quick thinks that the best exercise for the brain is reading. And that's why he reads 1 book every day. That's crazy, right? Every time Jim listens to a podcast or reads a book, he asks himself 3 questions. How can I use this? Why must I use this? Who can benefit from this? If you apply this in your work, you will be able to remember names, facts, and ideas with greater accuracy. And for now, what are the 3 things that you remember from this video? What are the 2 things that you want to do more research on or tell someone? And what is 1 thing that you want to try? Let me know, and I will see you next time. Bye!